This is part 2 of Give Me Liberty. Justification for conquest. What allowed one nation, the 17th century Dutch legal thinker Hugo Grotius wondered, to claim possession of lands that belonged to someone else? This question really occurred to most of the Europeans who crossed the Atlantic in the wake of Columbus's voyage with the rulers in the Old World. They had immense confidence in the superiority of their own cultures to those they encountered in America. They expected these societies to abandon their own beliefs and traditions and embrace those of their newcomers. Failure to do so reinforced the conviction that these people were uncivilized heathens or non-Christians. Europeans brought with them not only a long history of using violence to subdue their internal and external foes, but also missionary zeal to spread the benefits of their own civilization to others, while reaping the rewards of empire. Spain was no exception. The establishment of its empire in America took place in the wake of Spain's own territorial unification, the rise of a powerful royal government, and the enforcement of religious orthodoxy by the expulsion of Muslims and Jews in 1492. To further legitimize Spain's claim to rule the New World, a year after Columbus's first voyage, Pope Alexander VI divided the non-Christian world between Spain and Portugal. The line was subsequently adjusted to give Portugal control of Brazil, with the remainder of the Western Hemisphere falling under Spanish authority. Spreading the faith. Not surprisingly, the Pope justified this pronouncement by requiring Spain and Portugal to spread Roman Catholicism among the native inhabitants of the Americas. The missionary element of colonization, already familiar because of the Long Holy War against Islam within Spain itself, was powerfully reinforced in the 16th century when the Protestant Reformation divided the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. In 1517, Martin Luther, a German priest, posted his 95 Theses, which accused the Church of worldliness and corruption. Luther wanted to cleanse the Church of abuses such as the sale of indulgences, official dispensations for forgiving sins. He insisted that all believers should read the Bible for themselves rather than relying on priests to interpret it for them. His call for reform led to the rise of new Protestant churches independent of Rome, and plunged Europe into more than a century of religious and political strife. He was a reformist who demanded these changes within the Roman Catholic Church, so he was a Protestant. This still being an adherent, someone faithful to the Roman Catholic Church, still a member of it, right? A lot were executed because they went against the church, they opposed what the church was doing. But he was still a faithful Roman Catholic to the end. This Protestant church, or these Protestants, didn't emerge out of there till later on. They were still associated with that Roman Catholic Church, the Mother Church. In that sense, they were just Protestants or Protestants until they later separated from that church completely. But the Protestant church today, many factions, many denominations, suck up to the Pope, today's Pope, right? Because they maybe need funding or something else, or they're just sucking up to him, right? Proclaiming him his holiness, the mediator between God and man, replacing the Christ, that he's the only one who can forgive sins, all this sort of stuff. Okay, so Spain, the most powerful bastion of Orthodox Catholicism, redoubled its efforts to convert the Indians to the true faith. Yeah, because a lot of the South Americans didn't have a word for hell in their language, right? They had fire and all that sort of stuff, and they didn't understand the concept of hell. If you don't believe you're going to go to hell, then you're going to burn, you're going to get tortured, you're going to burn forever, all that sort of stuff. They didn't have anything in their language for that. So these missionaries that went there, they had to create a word, right? And then introduce it to those Indians and they finally got it, and then they were able to convert them to their form of Christianity. They were subject to them, right? And then they probably went in there and took all their possessions, etc., etc. It had complete control over them. Spain, the most powerful bastion of Orthodox Catholicism, redoubled its efforts to convert the Indians to the true faith. National glory and religious mission went hand in hand. Convinced of the superiority of Catholicism to all other religions, Spain insisted that the primary goal of colonization was to save the Indians from heathenism, or the heathenistic ways, and prevent them from falling under the sway of Protestantism. So they're trying to persuade them because they didn't want them going to the Protestant churches, right? Their opposition, their competition. They wanted to be the number one, the mother church of all. They believed they had that high superiority above all others. So you had to come under them. So that Protestant church had pulled away from them for a time. The aim was neither to exterminate nor to remove the Indians, but to transform them into obedient Christian subjects, or servants or slaves, of the crown. Indeed, lacking the later concept of race as an unchanging inborn set of qualities and abilities, many Spanish writers insisted that Indians could in time be brought up to the level of European civilization. Of course, this meant not only the destruction of existing Indian political structures, but also a transformation of the economic and spiritual lives. Piety and profit. To the Spanish colonizers, the large native populations of the Americas were not only souls to be saved, but also a labour force to be organised to extract gold and silver that would enrich the mother country. So they had to do all this work for them, go into these deep dark pits, etc., and get this gold and the silver for them, and they shipped it off to their country and made their king or queen, or king and queen, rich, maybe themselves rich as well. Yeah, rich off the backs of these native Indians. The tension between the two outlooks would mark Spanish rule in America for 3 centuries. On the one hand, Spanish rulers proclaimed the goal of bringing true freedom to the Indians by instructing them in Christianity. Even enslaving the natives was justified as a means of liberating them from their own backwardness, or the heathenism and savagery, and enabling them to become part of Christian civilization. Religious orders established missions throughout the empire, and over time millions of Indians were converted to Catholicism. On the other hand, Spanish rule, especially in its initial period, witnessed a disastrous fall in Indian population, not only because of epidemics but also because of the brutal conditions of labour to which Indians were subjected. The conquistadores and subsequent governors who required conquered peoples to acknowledge the Catholic Church and provide gold and silver saw no contradiction between serving God and enriching themselves. Others, however, did. La Casa's complaint. As early as 1537, Pope Paul III, who hoped to see Indians become devout subjects of Catholic monarchs, outlawed their enslavement, an edict never extended to apply to Africans. His decree declared Indians to be truly men who must not be treated as dumb beasts. 15 years later, the Dominican priest Bartolomé de las Casas published an account of the decimation of the Indian population with the compelling title, A Very Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies. Las Casas' father had sailed on Columbus' second voyage, and he himself had participated in the conquest of Cuba. But in 1514, La Casas freed his own Indian slaves and began to preach against the injustices of Spanish rule. La Casas' writings denounced Spain for causing the death of millions of innocent people. It has been Spain's practice, he reported, in every land they have discovered to stage a massacre in order to make the inhabitants tremble with fear. He narrated in shocking detail the strange cruelties carried out by the Christians. including the burning alive of men and women and children and the imposition of forced labour. The Indians, he wrote, had been totally deprived of their freedom and were put in the harshest, fiercest, most terrible servitude and captivity. Long before the idea was common, Las Casas insisted that Indians were rational beings, not barbarians, and that Spain had no grounds on which to deprive them of their lands and liberty. The entire human race is one, he proclaimed, and while he continued to believe that Spain had a right to rule in America, largely on religious grounds, he called for Indians to enjoy all guarantees of liberty and justice from the moment they became subjects of Spain. Nothing is certainly more precious in human affairs, nothing more esteemed, he wrote, than freedom. Yet Las Casas also suggested that importing slaves from Africa would help to protect the Indians from exploitation. So he was using one to protect the other. Reforming the empire. Like other Spaniards, Las Casas believed that the main justification for empire was converting the Indians to Christianity. Spanish cruelty, he feared, undermined this effort. Largely because of Las Casas' efforts, Spain in 1542 promulgated the new laws, commanding that Indians no longer be enslaved. Not everyone welcomed the change. Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of the conqueror of Peru, organised an unsuccessful rebellion in protest. In 1550, Spain abolished the encomienda system, under which the first settlers had been granted authority over conquered Indian lands with the right to extract and force labour from the native inhabitants. In its place, the government established the repartimiento system, whereby residents of Indian villages remained legally free and entitled to wages, but were still required to perform a fixed amount of labour each year. But it's just like a job, isn't it? That's what a job's all about. By the end of the 16th century, work in the Spanish Empire consisted largely of forced wage labour by native inhabitants and slave labour by Africans on the West Indian islands and a few parts of the mainland. Like all empires, Spain's always remained highly exploitative. Over time, the initial brutal treatment of Indians improved somewhat, but Las Casas' writings, translated almost immediately into several European languages, contributed to the spread of the Black Legend, the image of Spain as a uniquely brutal and exploitative colonizer. This would provide a potential justification for other European powers to challenge Spain's predominance in the world.